Welcome back, folks. Pastor Steve here again. Super excited that you came and wanted to see what chapter 3 was all about. Um, so, as we left beforehand, we were studying chapter 2. Chapter 2 was talking about when Jonah was inside the belly of the fish, the prayer he prayed, things like that. Um, it's an amazing chapter. So if you haven't seen any of the previous videos, please go back and check those out. So because we went through chapter 1 and chapter 2, now we're on to chapter 3, and we'll do chapter 4 tonight as well. But if you want to stay up to date on all of our Bible studies that we're going to be doing, so I'm hoping to teach as much out of the Bible as I can. Definitely believe that the fivefold ministerial office that I've been called to as a teacher. So that's what makes my heart happy, and it's what I'm excited to be able to do for you guys, is definitely to teach you something new, especially about the Bible. It's, again, one of the greatest things, one of the greatest pleasures of my life, one of the greatest honors is to serve the Lord, and He called and ordained me in order to do this. And so really hope that you get some sort of fulfillment out of it, some sort of substance out of it, and it continues to enrich your walk with God. Especially, we'll also be looking at posting some sermons and things of the house church that we have here at Crown of Life Fellowship. I just can't wait. So again, hopefully you enjoy this. I'm going to start right here in Jonah chapter 3, reading out of the New King James Version of the Bible. Please follow along if you're so inclined, okay? Amen. So it says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, 'Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach to it the message that I tell you.' So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3-day journey in extent. And Jonah began to enter the city on the first day's walk. Then he cried out and said, 'Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown.'" I ain't into that. So the people of Nineveh believed God, proclaimed a fast, and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of the least of them. Then word came to the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne and laid aside his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he caused it to be proclaimed and published throughout Nineveh by the decree of the king and his nobles, saying, "Let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth and cry mightily to God. Yes, let every one turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who can tell if God will turn and relent and turn away from his fierce anger, so that way we may not perish?" Then God saw their works, that they had turned from their evil way, and God relented from the disaster that he has said he would bring upon them, and he didn't do it. Amazing. So, this is very encouraging stuff, especially in the times that we live in with this global pandemic going on, this COVID-19 type disaster, pestilence, as I would call it, is going on. So, I'm going to break this down. We'll go every couple of verses like we did in the last video. So in the beginning, it is talking about this. "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, 'Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach to it the message that I tell you.'" And, this is basically his second go around. Like, look, you have this is now happening, a second time. So I'm giving you a second chance. Hopefully you'll listen this time around, right? And so in verse 3, "So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh, finally, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3 days journey in extent," which Jonah 3:3, we really don't know what that means by extent. Because it says a 3 days journey in extent. We really don't know what that means, as far as scholarly things go. Uh, Verse 4, and Jonah began to enter the city on the first day's walk. Then he cried out and said, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. So this is very interesting right here. So that was all he said. That was it. He walked right into Nineveh, and he just was. When it says he cried, then he cried out and said. That just means like he's, yelling it. Just everywhere. He's yelling it. He's making sure people heard the news. Right. He's like, yeah, 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. Oh yeah, and he's letting them know. And then we see in verse 5 something very interesting takes place. Verse 5 through 10. So the people of Nineveh believed God, proclaimed a fast, and put on sackcloth, from the greatest to the least of them. Okay, so what that means is, right, so they proclaimed a fast and put on sackcloth. So this is them humbling themselves. By utilizing the sackcloth and the fast, they are bringing themselves to God in the most, I don't know what the right word is, degraded? No. The most basic form that they could. They're saying, look, we're nothing. Okay? We did it. We know it. And so the people of Nineveh, the just the residents, that's what they're doing. They proclaimed a fast and put on that sackcloth as a way to identify, saying, hey, okay, enough said. 40 days. I don't know if we're gonna make that 40-day mark because we're fixing a fast, man. Don't want nothing to do with it. Don't want to be overthrown. These people were smart. They were listening. And then verse 6, then the word came to the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne and laid aside his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he caused it to be proclaimed and published throughout Nineveh by decree of the king and his nobles. And it goes on to tell us what that decree was. But even the king said, okay, got you. Took all of his royal robes and the things he was wearing and the things that made him stand apart from everybody else, to make him higher, if you will, than everyone else, and threw it aside and put on sackcloth and became like one of the residents and started fasting. And it says sat in ashes. But what this means is the king said, I got to humble myself before the Lord. This is not going to be good. We can't be having this. We can't be having not only it being overthrown, but my city destroyed in 40 days. Can't know. You remember I talk about patterns, 40 days? Yeah. Where else are we at with 40 days? But, yeah, it's very interesting to see that even a king recognized when he was doing something wrong, recognized something was out of place and said, okay. And it was just because Jonah said, hey, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. That's all he said. He went and warned them. And very rarely do we see this, that people actually listen. And that's even today. We could sit up in our courtrooms and different, platforms that we have these days, whether social media or, just downtown, wherever you live, and just going out proclaiming the gospel. And what happens is people just don't listen. And that's okay. That's their free will. They can do that if they choose to do that. But we see here that this king of Nineveh, which was in Assyria, used his free will and said, okay, got you. I'm going to listen. I'm going to do what I can, and what, I'm going to turn my ways that are wicked and turn to the Lord. It's very interesting to see that happen because it's not very common. But you can see what happens in verse 10, which I'll read to. This is verse 10. Then God saw their works, and they turned from their evil way, and God relented from the disaster that he had said he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. So with these people's reaction in Nineveh, when they had that reaction of humbling themselves, of proclaiming this fast, we see what God's reaction was. And God's reaction was he basically null and voided that whole disaster. That whole overthrown part has been completely thrown out the window. And he's like, okay, I see what you got going on. They fasted, they put on the sackcloth. They're humbling themselves before me, and recognizing that they have done wrong, and they have repented. They've just turned 180 degrees, and I'm not going to destroy them. And so it's it's something we should all take into consideration in today's age, and not just, like I say, going downtown and proclaiming, but in our own daily life. What are we doing that God could be like, look, you got to stop this, you know? And what can your reaction be? You remember I said in the first video, it's not what the change is, it's how you adapt to it. So what we see here is an example of that happening. This is biblical support for that. We can see what God was going to do. He was going to destroy them. He sent Jonah there to let them know it's coming in 40 days. You will be overthrown. So that throws a wrench right into their gas tank. Very interesting to see that happen. But what their response was to humble themselves. So you can see how that kind of correlates. You see what I mean? It correlates that way. And so what can you do that correlates? So that's something you really want to think of. And that's something this chapter 3 really teaches. How can you correlate this to your own life? So I'm going to leave you there with that to kind of ponder, you know, how can you react and adapt? And just like the king did, he reacted, he humbled and adapted. He humbled himself before God. That was his answer to this issue he had, and he adapted to it and said, okay, this is how we're going to solve the problem. And God's seen it and he honored it. Very interesting. All right, folks. I'll see you for chapter 4.